Welcome everyone, thank you. I'd have about 10 or 15 minutes to rush through all the problems that we have today, multi-species, multi-types of resistance, and to give some highlight as to where to go forward to some degree. I look forward to a lot of interaction, a lot of questioning. The problem about the northern grain region, apart from compared to the western regions or the southern regions, our survey data is rather scattered. It may be late, might be 5 to 10 years old, and it basically, like any survey data, really does underestimate the level of the problem we are facing. More importantly, we've identified a whole range of resistant weeds, and they're on a register. These are on the Australian Glyphosate Sustainable Working Group webpage or the International Register for Resistant Weeds. And we have primarily, we're looking at glyphosate resistance in particular, but we still have multiple resistant wild oats as one of our big issues. Fleabane, because it's so widely spread, it's resistant to glyphosate. But nonetheless, we've got emerging issues like barnyard grass, annual ryegrass, and windmill grass and liverseed grass. And technically speaking, I will not be covering feathertop rhodes because it has no label registration specifically for its control, so we don't deem that a resistant weed. And as John Cameron mentioned, it's a tolerant species that was always recognised as not being able to be controlled with glyphosate. Importantly, resistance is patchy. Your neighbour or one paddock in your property could be riddled with resistance and your neighbouring paddock may not have resistance. So it could be a small corner within one paddock also. So it could be in a drain or a roadside or a fence line. As mentioned by a few others, Dale in particular, but resistance is always going to get worse. Despite all our efforts, resistance spread and the number of species affected by resistance is just going upwards. More often than not, I'm starting to see farms that are dealing not with just one species, but a couple of species. So they're dealing with, say, a windmill grass resistant issue and then a glyphosate resistance issue in annual ryegrass. Okay, I acknowledge the work from the NGA. This is close to 5 years old data, but it gives you an idea for the uninitiated that wild oats is basically limiting some of our cropping options, particularly in pulse crops and also in some cereal crops, depending on how bad the resistance is. The survey was undertaken and it was basically involved 34 agronomists, and it involved looking at targeted paddocks, those having a high risk or high use pattern with poor control histories, and also 36 samples taken from random paddock surveys. They were sent and tested for 9 different herbicides. The results indicate here that out of the high risk samples, we have, in some cases, depending on the region, and that's Liverpool Plains, but in the order of about 80% success rate with resistance at least to wildcat, and for that matter, a little bit less for topic. We have some resistance, and this is only 5 years ago, and I dare say it's a lot worse. Resistance to Group B herbicides, Atlantis, Select is a DIM, which is one of your last options, and also Madavan. Interestingly enough, or quite not surprisingly, we haven't used a great deal of pre-emergent chemistries in the last 20 or 30 years, and therefore our pre-emergent options work quite well. A random survey done at the same time, as I said, it was about 36 paddocks, and even a background level of about 22% of the paddocks on average had some form of resistance. 1 in 5, I would dare say now that due to sampling procedure, you won't get every part of the paddock, and time, I dare say our resistance in paddocks on average, probably be at least every second paddock, will have some form of resistance problem in terms of Group A chemistry. And there's one paddock there that was resistant to Madavan. The problem is I've dealt with some paddocks that have had 3-way resistant wild oats to Group A, B and Z, which is your FOP and DIM chemistry, your sulfonylurea groups, and also Madavan in the one population. And in some cases, some farmers I've seen were desperately trying to put repeated applications of a Group B chemistry to try and knock that population out with only moderate success. And I dare say now that farm should be at least trying to look at some alternate tactics, because they had Group A and Z resistance, and all the post-emergent options were basically gone from the system. In this particular case, there's 59% of the high-risk paddocks had at least resistance to 3 or more different herbicides. So that's quite probably the norm now more than the exception. I often get a question saying my verdict or my topic did not work, and the season's quite late, it's August, and the wild oats are almost in the boot stage or in the jointing stage, and even without using Madivan, you've got a 1 in 4 chance of getting cross resistance. And these are the plants that were topic resistance, and in a screening test, 75% roughly, you'll still get Madivan to work, but occasionally you'll get 1 out of 4 samples that Madivan won't work, even if there wasn't a prior use of Madivan before. So you can get things like cross resistance that occur just due to the nature of the resistance mechanism. Glyphosate resistance in fleabane. Although not the main herbicide of choice for use in fleabane, Steve Walker from now Quaffy in Queensland has demonstrated there's a great degree of variability in fleabane susceptibility to glyphosate. And that's what you'd probably expect for most cases, but he has identified some populations that are a pushover. And that's explained by the graph here with the dose response. And you've got some, like that one that was dead in that pot there at the 1 times rate, hardly any survival, and you've got a whole range of variation in fleabane responses. And that's basically attributed to the prior selection pressure. So if it's come from a cropping paddock, you have a lot more survival when you use glyphosate, and that's just borne out in that data. My issues with the fleabane is that you could inherit problems quite quickly, being a wind-blown seed. It's on cotton farms, irrigation channels, roadsides, you name it, wherever you use glyphosate. And this is borne out in the data from the Glyphosate Sustainable Working Group, where is glyphosate-resistant fleabane, and I'm proud to say that New South Wales leads the race over Queensland. We have more on the roadsides, mainly a fair bit on the roadsides, particularly in southern New South Wales, in the Riverina, but we still have a fair bit up north. We have some in paddocks, but we just don't look for it. I'm sure that number should be several hundred. Irrigation systems, railways and buildings. So that's basically saying the weed is a wind-blown seed and you can inherit problems anywhere. Queensland have an issue, just being over the border, well, we're in Queensland, and South Australia, we have 6 where it was an intensively used horticultural situation. Barnyard grass. Barnyard grass is the one in the last 5 or so years has really gained its the dominance in the glyphosate resistance area in terms of research. It was first confirmed in 2007 at Balata, and steadily numbers had increased to 18 by about 2010. There have been other surveys in the past just to show that barnyard grass is quite present in the system, in the cropping systems, but they weren't specifically targeted at looking at resistance. There's a geographical distribution of barnyard grass. It could occur anywhere, in particularly the tropical areas, but New South Wales in the northern grain region in particular, it can occur almost anywhere. Given moisture, summer rainfall, and heavier soil types, it will tend to dominate. As a part of a survey in a RIDIC-funded project, the Rural Industries Research Development Corp, a year or so ago, gave us a 15-month project to look at glyphosate resistance in non-cropping areas. 9 samples were taken. It was quite hard to find barnyard grass on roadsides. It doesn't tend to grow on roadsides. It grows in irrigation channels and around silos. 3 were confirmed glyphosate resistant. That picture there is a place near St George, Queensland, and most of those plants survived, but there were some dead plants amongst that. And that is clearly a concern because of the nature of water movement to a cotton farm. So there you go. And then we've also had a 5-year project recently where we look at in-crop barnyard grass glyphosate resistance, where we enlisted the NGA agronomic network to give us samples and we just did a live test at Tamworth to determine whether there's glyphosate resistance out there. And that survey, if you look at the total down the bottom, 58% of the samples sent in were deemed glyphosate resistant, which is quite concerning. 27% susceptible, and as per normal screening tests, and the quality of some samples were a bit suspect, some just died in the pots. So there you go, glyphosate resistant barnyard grass is here, there and everywhere. It is mainly confined, I'll show you the map in the next slide, but most of that was actually in response to what the agronomists thought they were going to get. So if they thought they had a resistant sample sent in and we said resistant, that was 57% of the samples. And if it was susceptible and we got susceptible, that's in concurrence. So in total, about 80% of the samples were what the agronomist, the result was exactly what they thought they were getting. There was a few anomalies. Here's a map of northern New South Wales and southeast Queensland. Moree is at where the pointer is. St George, there's Goondiwindi there, and there's the numbers of or distribution of the glyphosate resistance. So you've really got a heartland around anywhere between Goondiwindi and herbaria, and you've got a few outlying populations in the Darling Downs here. Now this is only survey, I'm sure there's more out there than just that, but it was a reasonably targeted survey. Of concern is the level of glyphosate resistance. I've put on, along the top here, the glyphosate rate from 0 to 12.8 litres of 450 formulation glyphosate, or CT type glyphosate. And that's the standard resistant population from Balada. 49% control at 6.4, 78% control at 12.8 litres. And we have some biotypes down here which hardly made a dent at 12.8 litres, which is quite concerning. Only 11% control, 44% control. You might start to scratch your head thinking that your techo actually sprayed the herbicide out, but it was sprayed. So there you go. Some of the level of resistance is probably well beyond the 10 to 12-fold rate at least. And resistance in the field, this is important. Farmers battling resistance are unknowingly spreading the glyphosate-resistant plants along the edge of tracks. So in-farm quarantine is particularly important. That one may have been commenced by just a bit of mud coming off the tyre. You've got along the road track there, you've got some in the headlands, just where the farmer drives his car. And in that particular case, it was quite rampant in one paddock where it's 100% infestation. I'll skip through that, but that just basically says that Group A herbicides are used a fair bit in the north. 6% of the overall fallow paddocks by a survey this time last year indicates that 6% use Group A herbicides in particular. Hopefully most of the use is is followed up with another control measure. So we're using paraquat after it or glyphosate, so we're trying to prevent Group A resistance developing. And I'll just skim through annual ryegrass, but annual ryegrass can occur from Moree down south, but particularly in the Liverpool Plains. I've noticed a few guys from the Liverpool Plains here and also into the Central West area. We've got multiple resistance, particularly down in the southern part of New South Wales, but luckily in northern New South Wales our herbicides still work except for glyphosate generally. And some of the survey responses from a guy called John Broster, Charles Sturt Uni, suggest these insane levels of resistance to other chemistries. And eventually with time we'll probably go down that way because we will lean on the Group A chemistry where some of the samples, 75 to 100% of samples sent in southern New South Wales are resistant to Group A. They're getting some Group B resistance pretty badly. And they've also started to get resistance to atrazine and trifluorine because they're starting to use it, and one case of paraquat resistance. But that's not in the north at the moment. And here's where glyphosate-resistant ryegrass is in in Australia, and we still yet again lead the pack here generally. Chemical fallows, i.e. Liverpool plains. We have it in the winter grain side of things. We've got it in a summer grain rotation, irrigated, or not in irrigated crops, but we've got it in generally most environments in New South Wales and not into Queensland, clearly. But it is an issue, and there is a good creep, and it's extending its boundary a little bit more each year. Windmill grass, it was recently confirmed resistant a couple of years ago, and it was due to the fact that it was on the Touchdown High-Tech label. And yet again, in the national survey for the RIDIC-funded project, we looked at non-crop resistance, and we found a few samples. 22 samples were sent in, 2 from Queensland, predominantly in the central western parts of New South Wales, and 1 was confirmed resistant. And that was basically right beside the in-crop paddock, which was confirmed. We used the same GPS coordinates. However, there's a fair bit of glyphosate used along roadsides in southern New South Wales and Victoria, and it's a fair bit more glyphosate resistance detected. The problem is with windmill grass, there's not many alternate products available. Glyphosate is the main one. There's really nothing else. There's a permit out for the use of chrysallophop, and there's grave concerns over the overuse of that and chrysallophop resistance developing. So we're trying to look at, well, GOA from Grain Arana Alliance are looking at the use of pre-emergent chemistries to try and get an earlier attack on this weed. And that's where windmill grass is, primarily still in Queensland, southeast Queensland on the lighter soil types, and also Western Australians are finding it quite hard to control. So there you go. I acknowledge almost everyone in this room. Anyone who deals with weeds, who sends a sample in or sends it to the herbaria, agronomist, whoever was involved with any samples getting sent in for testing. Thank you very much.